and hopefully bring them to a global audience. Many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have. HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur, the leader is a communicator, the leader is a manager, the leader as a negotiator, the leader as a follower, and the leader as a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. In this episode of HLA Live, we are talking about the future of the medical curriculum, hosted by Vasily.
Hello everyone and welcome to this new episode of HLA Live. I'm Vasily, I'm one of the final year students at Holyoke Medical School and one of the HLA scholars. And today I'm here also because of my role in the BMA as Deputy Chair of Education, looking at the medical curriculum and how we can bring on inclusivity and enhance its content for the needs of these modern cohort of medical students. I am joined today by a very extraordinary panel of very interesting people, and I will let them introduce themselves to let you know about their own field, their specialties, and their interest. So please, guys, take it away.
Hi, my name is Oki. I'm a fourth year medical student at the University of Dundee, and I also appear on the BMJ's podcast called Sharp Scratch.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm a medical student at Barts, currently integrating at LSHTM. I'm currently the Global Health Education Director for Students for Global Health, and I also work with Apologia, which is a student-led global health think tank. So I'm going to be talking about global health education on the curriculum.
Hi there, so my name is Roger. I'm a medical student from King's, currently integrating at Imperial Building Management. Have a real strong interest in digital health, so we're talking about sort of digital health and curriculum. And I currently host something called That Medic Podcast, which I do with my friends in America.
Hi, I'm Simran. I'm a fourth year medical student at King's, and I'm the founder of Med for All, which is a new med ed organisation looking at improving inclusivity in the curriculum.
Hi, my name is Mclinden. I am a third year medic at St George's University of London. I'm also the co-author of Mind the Gap, which is a clinical handbook of signs and symptoms in black and brown skin.
Hi, my name's Emma. I'm a third year medical student at the University of Southampton. I've worked on access to medicines as National Coordinator of UAM and with my faculty to introduce mental health education in the curriculum. And I'm currently working on an organisation called Mind Health, which supports healthcare practitioners with their mental health.
Hello, I'm Jack Mclinden, a fourth year medical student at Bristol. I'm also a HLA scholar and the president of Glenicals, which is Bristol's MedSoc. And I've formerly been a trustee of the University of Bristol.
Fantastic. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. It's going to be a very exciting and interesting discussion. So I think we should start by addressing the elephant in the room. So my very first question to you is the curriculum good enough? And what needs to change?
I think that's a really difficult question because I personally I don't think anything can ever be good enough. I think things need to be in a constant state of evolution. The moment we stop evolving and adapting to what is going on around us, then that's when things become really outdated and not fit for purpose. So I guess in answer, the medical curriculum is not good enough and it will never be good enough.
I think, like you said, it's so important for almost a curriculum which is not rigid and is fluid, so it adapts to the times. What we might talk about today and say that this is amazing and this is the future of the curriculum, we might get to the future and it no longer be relevant or not the best decision. So I think it just needs to be something which has that room for change periodically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think on the whole, you know, the medical school curriculum is producing thousands of competent doctors each year. So, you know, it's hitting its bare minimum and it's doing what it has to do. But it's that, you know, it's been raised already, it's that constant state of flux and always wanting to improve. And that kind of goes for any organization, and medical schools aren't going to be any different. They can't just rest on their laurels and comfortably say, we've reached this point that we're good enough.
So I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. Like, completely echo it. But I think, this moment in time is historic. COVID-19 is a historic moment in time, and we've got to really think about how this has completely changed healthcare. I think we'll probably discuss it later on, but one aspect in the way it's sort of changed healthcare is the sort of delivery of healthcare. So of course I'm going to talk about digital health, but the way we sort of deliver healthcare is no longer in person, but it's actually, remotely, through video consultations, through over the phone, through apps. So I think thinking about how this sort of COVID-19 lockdown has changed how we deliver healthcare is really interesting, and it makes us sort of think about how we're going to sort of transition and adapt. Once everything sort of come back to normal. Whether these sort of things will be, whether this sort of delivery of healthcare will be the same as it is right now, or whether we'll go back to what we had before.
Can I ask you a question on that? Do you think that delivery of healthcare was almost too late? That we should have started delivering like healthcare through apps, through telephone consultations, like maybe like 2, 3, 4 years ago, but we were almost too late in medicine, if that makes sense?
I think the problem is at the moment, there isn't much evidence there to sort of demonstrate that the things we're using, for example, telemedicine, video consultations, that is actually helping to manage patients and really to ensure the sort of continuity of care. There isn't much evidence there as of yet, but I think we should have been doing it a few years ago. And I think in terms of the sort of benefits of it, increasing the accessibility of healthcare for people that can't, sort of hard to reach groups, you can't actually come to the GP practice and stuff. There are sort of a lot of benefits there. But of course, the other side of things, what we've realized during lockdown is the fact that, people don't have access to digital tools. You think everyone has access to the internet and everyone has access to a smartphone and all this stuff. That's actually not the case. There's a massive digital divide at the moment, which we're seeing across the UK and across globally. And it's these sort of things we need to think about. And these sort of things we need to sort of educate, not only the workforce, but also medical students to realize how it might impact them going forward. But I'm guessing it's something we might sort of discuss, through this sort of meeting.
And if we pull it back to the curriculum, I think, that issue still exists. And I know a lot of people here are very involved in accessibility in medicine and might correct me, but I think we should have moved earlier to a lot of the things that we're doing now. I mean, now we're seeing there have been a good handful of nationally arranged peer-to-peer teaching programs that have reached kind of viral significance almost among medical students. You ask the names of things like Smile, Learn Medicine, these almost viral programs. I'm kind of shocked it's only come in now, but it's only because we've had that change of COVID that's forced us to actually start using the technologies that make them possible. I mean, the other similarity is in Bristol, we're on clinical attachments all over the southwest of England. So you can be as far as an hour and a half away from central placement. And actually to get back for one big coordinated lecture that all the years at, it's not necessary and not practical now. And I think actually the changes that's made have really improved the medical student experience in some ways. I totally think that the accessibility and the digital divide is vital to that. With universities and the way that education is now, most people there are IT literate, have access. So I think that's an easier thing to introduce. And if we're bringing it back to the curriculum, I think it's going to stay this way. Whether that'll translate into practice is another question. But for the curriculum strictly, I think it'll stay.
I would also say that at my university, at least, not all the lectures were recorded before the pandemic started. And this disproportionately did affect students with chronic illnesses who couldn't always make it to all the lectures, where inevitably they would fall behind and not be able to catch up to the other students, and then have to spend a lot more time studying independently. And although all those extra things online, like you said, are great as extra education tools, they shouldn't be what our students have to mainly rely on to get their content. They should be able to get that from their university.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I think it's really important. So we've seen such a huge step forward, perhaps a leap forward that would have taken otherwise even decades to achieve in terms of the technology and the resources. And for example, I know Simran, you're part of a group who really relies on social media, as well as you, Raja. And we know that podcast, especially in the last decade, plays such a huge role into it. But what do you think should be our direction? It's how can we make sure, like Emma said, that actually that content which is provided online by third party actually becomes part of the curriculum? And why is it being provided online in the first place then?
I think there's an assumption that everyone has access to the internet, everyone has these sort of tools, but that isn't the case. But I think really what we need to just be doing is just educating medical students on what technology is, why it's important, and what are the benefits. You know, at the moment you have things like the Topper Review, the Wox Review, and all these digital health reports. What they're doing is basically talking about, you know, what's been done in the space already, and what's been done in terms of, like, for example, electronic health records. The reason why some of these implementations have failed is because of disengagement. You know, they implement this record, but then none of the sort of workforce actually knows how to use them. You know, they don't know how to interact with them. They don't know how to log on. You know, a lot of them are sort of stuck in their ways. They're happy to use paper records, for example. And this is, you know, and the most important thing is they're not actually convinced of the benefits. If you're a doctor or a nurse, I'm not a doctor, of course, at the moment, but I'm a medical student. But, you know, these people are so busy. Why do they want to why would they want to use a whole new system? You know, why would they want to use something completely new? You know, they want you to convince them that this thing is going to save them time. And that's why things which is happening at the moment are so important. So things like the Digital Health Academy, what they're doing is basically providing scholarships and fellowship programs to basically develop something called CCIOs, which is Chief Clinical Information Officers, which are basically going to lead the way within healthcare. So these people will basically do the program. They become informed about technology and how to use it. They basically go back to the practice and they teach everyone else in the practice how to use these things. And this is great. This is great. This is exactly what we need for the workforce, to engage them, understand how to use them. But the question is, you know, why are we doing it at medical school? You know, this starts from day one. The moment you enter medical school, we need to be teaching medical students how to use this. I'm in 4th year now, you know, and I'm only just starting to realize this stuff, which is crazy, you know, which is quite sad as well, because, you know, whether you like it or not, guys, you know, the digital health transformation, electronic health records, you know, telemedicine, all this stuff, it's going to happen whether we like it or not, because you hear about Matt Hancock and stuff, like his sort of vision, you know, this is the direction we're going in. But we need to prepare not only the workforce, but I think we need to prepare medical students for it. And I think that's why education and integrating this stuff in the curriculum right now, from day one, I think is just really essential. Otherwise, we'll end up falling behind and we won't be prepared for it.
You mentioned that it should pretty much start from day one, isn't it? So how do you all guys feel like we can actually implement changes in the way we deliver medical education, and especially incorporating the technology we'll be using in our future careers since day one in medical school? And perhaps you already have some examples amongst your own year group or any experiences you have done.
I just wanted to just pick up on some stuff that Raja has said. I think the big problem, I think, with uptake of technology is I don't think people are necessarily not wanting to take on technology. I think there are multiple things that affect people's use of technology. And I think in this scenario, in terms of healthcare in the UK, and I think the biggest problem is poor design. I think a lot of these new technologies just aren't designed appropriately for people to take it up. So for example, we all use our iPhones without thinking about it. We all use our computers. That's because it's very much user intuitive. In my local health board, I don't know what goes on around the rest of the UK, but you need so many different login details just to do your normal day-to-day job. So I think it's great having all these ideas of different technologies and how to make things quicker and more efficient, and teaching people about it. But I think the reason I decided to do medicine is because I felt like there wasn't a single way to be a doctor. So I'm not going to say I have no interest in technology, but let's imagine I have zero interest in technology. I don't care about how it works. I really couldn't care at all. All I want to do is I want to be able to go to work and do my job. And I don't want to be taught anything. I don't want to waste my time doing extra CPD sessions on how to use this new program. I want to be able to go in, use the program, and just do it. If my employer just brings in this new program and it's user intuitive, I probably wouldn't even think twice about it.
I wanted to say, based on what Raja said earlier about starting things early on in the curriculum, I think that's a really fantastic point. I think it extends to sort of anything in the curriculum, and especially inclusivity, because more recently, I know this is a slight change of topic, but more recently, I'm learning more and more how unprepared I am for so many different patient scenarios, whether that be patients with disabilities or patients with different communication needs, or something like doing a cervical smear for a transgender man, just things that would be unfamiliar to me, and I've not been taught how to help the patient or best support the patient. And I think in those unfamiliar situations, you immediately revert back to that sort of panicked feeling of, I don't know what to do here, I'm completely stuck, how do I get out of here, make it go as quickly as possible. Whereas I think if, as you were saying, Roger, we were taught it from early on, and we built up those feelings of confidence and experience, and just being more comfortable in those unfamiliar situations, by the time we left medical school, I think we'd all be a lot better off. I think our patients would also feel much more comfortable.
Yeah.
So this is very much to do with building up resilience in our students as well, which I think is so integral, and which a lot of our medical schools at the moment are lacking, in terms of mental health education, how to enhance our well-being rather than just treating our medical students and our doctors once they already have signs and symptoms of like depression, anxiety and stress. And so building up this well-being in our medical students, and then teaching them kind of like key things such as like mindfulness and how to cope with these like unfamiliar stressful situations, is another thing that very much enhances our adaptability when we encounter these kind of circumstances that we haven't been prepared for in medical school. Because I mean, there's so many situations that, I mean, our medical schools can try and teach us as much as they can. They're not going to be able to prepare us for every single situation. And although our courses are so content heavy, and I mean, that's great for being somewhat prepared, if we focus on also teaching students how to adapt, then we'll be prepared for a lot more.
I would agree with you completely, Emma. I think, so in answer to like changing the curriculum, or like what we'd add or change, I would say, rather than being so knowledge focused, I would prefer the curriculum to be a bit more skills focused. So like, it's impossible to like see every patient from every minority over the course of 5 years at medical school. Like that is completely impossible. But if we're given the skills in order to like deal with all these different situations and all these different presentations, I feel like that is a lot more beneficial. Like, who cares about the Krebs cycle? I don't care. I just know it's a thing. That's all I care about. I'd rather not be examined on that. I'd rather be examined.
It's funny because I was speaking at the Royal Society of Medicine last week, and there was a consultant who was saying that he's never used a Krebs cycle in his entire life. And that stuff like that in medical school is like, you know it to pass the exam, and that's literally where you'll leave it, unless you become the specialist of the specialist in a particular field. That's probably the only time you'll need it. And he also posed the question, which I think is an interesting question for you guys, of, do you think the medical curriculum will be in a better place if we almost specialized earlier? So while we're at medical school, if, I don't know, so many people have their hearts set on being a surgeon or a pediatrician, if there was almost a way in like your fourth or final year that you could select those modules and then leave everything else like for everybody else to do, do you think our curriculum will be like in a better place? Because essentially you're learning tailored things to that group of people, so then you can kind of cater and pay more attention to the specific needs of all of those minorities in that group.
So in my experience, I'm not sure how it is at other medical schools, the majority of the content and kind of like the general content, like the Krebs cycle and things that might not be used in the future, are kind of focused in first and second year. And then later on, we mostly have placement, which kind of gives us a practical experience within the hospital. So I'm not sure, I mean, I haven't seen any studies about this in particular, but from what I know through word of mouth, a lot of people who I know have, in fourth and fifth year, they've got their hearts set on doing one specialty or another, and then they do their foundation years, and having that real life experience perhaps changes the direction that they would want to go in. So perhaps that's an interesting concept, but in my opinion, perhaps taking away some of the stuff that is quite unnecessary in the first and second years would be useful, and maybe specializing people too early would stop them from being able to properly see the variety of options that are available, because things like surgery are very much like glamorized, and other specialties people might just have no knowledge of?
From my perspective, just as a panel host as well as a medical student, I totally agree with what Emma said, but I also see Malon's point. So I'm one of the weird people who chose to do neurosurgery very early on in my career. I'm one of the weird and wonderful out there who set his heart to this specialty. And I would have loved, perhaps if I was in third year, to be given an option to simply do neurosurgery so earlier on. But I'm also from an Italian background, and I've compared my training here in the UK with my friends back in Italy. And I've seen the huge difference in the way we have trained, in the skills and the knowledge that we have developed. And it's very different because they are very theory-based and we're more practical in terms of our training, but they also lack foundation training. They also lack the very generalized training that we receive. And all of those skills that now as a final year, I truly value. I never thought I could enjoy GP, but all of those skills I built for 4 years prior to my latest rotation were incredibly valuable. And those are the basic skills that perhaps I would not want to compromise by specializing too early, no matter how much I may actually like it, because ultimately you need those skills for those infrequently encountered situations in placement. And that's why I agree with some of the points already made. I think we need those basic skills really made more robust within our curriculum.
Something that's really important is a focus on the idea of experience rather than the idea of competence. So competency-based medical education is probably what all of our medical schools do and really focus on. And that's sort of what's taken us into like a tick box approach of these are the things you need to do and that's what makes you a good doctor. And I think especially from like coming from a global health perspective, that's not necessarily effective. So you can't teach students about global health by cramming in a week of lectures that no one turns up to, and it's just there as a tick box for you to say we've got it in our curriculum. So just things like that. I think global health particularly interacts with every specialty. You've got like global surgery, you've got communicable disease, you've got global mental health, and things like that. I think analysing issues in global health and understanding it helps everyone become a better doctor. So at Students of Global Health, one of our mottos is global health is local health. So without doctors who are aware of the issues of health inequality, both around the world but also within our own country, how can you practice medicine without understanding those things? So I think that, I think one of the flaws of medical education is this massive focus on competence rather than on building experience. And I think that actually one of the good things to come out of COVID possibly is the idea of like the FIY1 role and like the idea of building experience over competence before practicing.
I'm going to say that I think Malone's question is really important, and I think it's going to need to be discussed because actually, you know, nationally and globally, we're facing shortages of doctors, and one really easy, appealing solution is to shorten a training program and have it more specialized. I don't have the answers. I think, you know, the points raised are excellent. There's pros and cons both ways, but I think it's something we want to think about for the future because it's going to become a conversation. And the experience over competence, that's a really interesting thing. And I agree, FIY1 has kind of shown it. And the other thing that's been happening over the last few years is a lot more university curriculums moving towards a finals in fourth year, apprenticeship in fifth year model. And I think that's the sort of step along the way. And FIY1 has really shown, you know, the FI1 doctors who've started this year, a lot of them have said, actually, that stepping stone and that easing into it has been remarkable for that transition, which is always a massive pinch point in any doctor's career. So I think those things are giving the evidence that, you know, this works, this learning on the job. And, you know, if you take the global perspective as well, you look at the way the States teaches medical education, India is another country that does it. These people are part of the healthcare team without which the system couldn't survive. And actually being involved, making decisions that way really boosts your learning and benefits your learning so that when you start and when you're given that responsibility, it's something you're a lot more comfortable with. So I would agree FIY1 has given that kind of encouragement to more medical schools to start thinking about this as the way to do things in the future.
I would say like other healthcare professionals do this already. Is well, in Dundee at least anyway. So like the nursing students are rotated on as part of the nursing staff, and you can almost tell the difference in their experience of learning in comparison to the other medical students who are on the ward, because they actually have a responsibility for bay number 2. So they need to make sure the patients get their OBS and all their washings and get all their medication, obviously being supervised by a qualified nurse. But it's, I think it's actual genuine experiential learning. Sorry, Simran, you were going to say something.
I was actually going to go back to your prior point about whether we should be more skill-based rather than knowledge-based, because it's something I've thought about before as well. And I think I sort of thought, actually, we are quite skilled up. I think they spend a lot of time teaching us to be good communicators and to be patient and to be empathetic. But it's more that when we're put into these unfamiliar situations, we lose it all because we don't know what to do. But like someone else said before, you can never be prepared for every situation. And I think part of that feeling of panic comes from the fact that as a medical student and then a doctor, you're expected to be the expert in the room. And if you're in an unfamiliar situation, you are not. And having the confidence to say, look, I've actually never been in this situation before. How would you like me to approach it? What do you think is the best thing to do? If you've got a deaf patient who's come through the door and you don't know how the best way is to communicate with them, it's better for you not to guess. It's better for you to ask and say, look, actually, you're the first deaf patient I've had. How would you like to communicate? And they'll tell you what works for them. But I think installing that confidence into students to be able to ask their patients, what would you like me to do? Or to feel okay not being the expert in the room would be quite a good place to start in terms of preparing students to be adaptable to situations they've not experienced before.
So healthcare students tend to be, especially medical students, tend to be very much type A kind of people. So at the moment I'm doing a research project in anxiety and depression versus well-being in doctors. So it's a lot about kind of the factors that begin in medical school that kind of lead to those problems. And one thing that's come up is just there's such an environment where it doesn't seem like it's okay to be wrong, and people feel like there's almost a stigma around asking for help and admitting that they don't know something. So there have been certain pilot studies like where people write like a reflective essay once every couple of weeks while on placement about kind of how they felt interacting with patients, and then they discuss it with like a senior member of staff and that kind of thing. And it's very important in building our skill base around that. And also your point about being taught communication and stuff, and so on, such as like epidemiology and kind of like communicating with patients properly. I have that at my medical school and it's great, but there is very much a culture that I've noticed by medical students where it's like, oh, this isn't important, so I'm not going to go, because everyone's very focused. We have so much content. Everyone says, okay, well, I'm only going to go to the lectures that are directly going to contribute to me getting higher exam results. And so another thing, short of scrapping our current examination system, is including new questions in our question banks, which when I've communicated with the faculty about adding some eating disorder questions in, they've said is very, very difficult because they tend to focus on adding more physiology and anatomy questions and not so much other more softer skills based questions, which could be another method to improve.
I think that's a really good point. And one way of including that inclusivity into the curriculum as it is already, without having to sort of add it on top so that students can say, oh, I don't want to go to that, or it's just another thing I have to do, is just integrating it into the current curriculum. So for example, something basic like dermatology teaching, rather than just showing skin conditions on white skin, showing it on different colored skin. Or if you've got an OSCE situation with a diabetic patient, have that patient be fasting. So put in some sort of cultural competence that is very realistic rather than just the condition by itself. So it's not just the medicine, you're always sort of including the fact that people are all different and including that diversity integrated into the curriculum.
And using strategies like that combined with the resilience and the ability to admit you don't know or you're wrong, that's very important as well. But to add those things in, quite often these are helical themes or circular curriculums or whatever term your medical school likes to use, which it gets paid lip service to every year. It doesn't actually mean anything. But if you properly integrate it, it becomes truly something that's helical. And actually, the idea behind that is good, you know? If it's something you start right from the start and you're always thinking about, and every time you learn something new, you're thinking, how can this impact other people? Okay, you'll not prepare for everything in every situation, and that's where the resilience kicks in. But if you can be prepared for more, it'll make for a more comfortable experience when you're a doctor.
So just wondering, how do we ensure that these medical students from first and second year speak up? Because the problem is that they won't know any of these things until they reach fourth and fifth year. So what sort of, I'm just wondering to get your sort of thoughts, like what sort of things can we do now to educate and encourage students to sort of speak up about these things and then to sort of get a voice?
The thing is that the younger students don't know until you're in like fourth or fifth year, or you've spoken to doctors. You have no idea what you're missing. It's like you don't know what you don't know. So it's the responsibility of older students and doctors to go back to the faculty, even though it doesn't affect them at all anymore, because obviously they're not going to go back in time and get that teaching. They have to say, look, I want these students to be able to get the teaching that I never had, and this is the way that we can do it, and work together with the faculty to approach this. And it does take a lot of work and a lot of manpower in order to change the curriculum. And I think universities, a lot of the time, they're very isolated in their curriculum changes. So I think it is quite important for universities to perhaps work together in order to bring about greater change.
I think it's a very tricky perspective in order to achieve it. And I absolutely agree with everything that has been said. And by all means, yes, I want to see the changes in the curriculum happen as well. But if you were to have experienced anything like this, you'll probably sit on a committee board, you'll probably speak to someone even behind closed doors or on a side coffee tables in the main open plan of your university, and they'll tell you that there is so much content already in the curriculum, something will have to come out and there's no way they can include it. Or perhaps they will tell you, like we will have seen, I'm sure we've all seen it with some of the topics we're more passionate about, there is no a primary topic we should be taught or we should be covering. And it comes down, I'm sure, to the fact that we wanting to achieve knowledge or we wanting to achieve skills in our training. So ultimately, how can we achieve it and whose responsibility is this? Because students may not be able to do so without the adequate support, but even then, how do we reach the right spot where to hit the jackpot?
I actually disagree with the concept of it being extremely difficult to change. I think there's a difference between something being extremely difficult to change and people not wanting to change at all. And I think a lot of the time it's more so on the side of people not wanting to change, because when you try to change something, like Emma said, I think it requires a lot of manpower, it requires a lot of effort, and people just don't want to do that. I think in my own example with the work that I've been doing with Mind the Gap, I've spoken to so many influential people in the medical education field, and fundamentally my take home from all of these conversations is the medical curriculum really and truly can be changed. There is scope for change, but it almost feels as if people don't want to put that work in, because if it goes wrong, someone's almost job is on the line, or they kind of look at the negatives to changing the curriculum, like, oh, if it goes wrong, this might happen or this might happen. Why would we change a system that is adequately working, not working to the best of its abilities, but it is still doing its job? And I think that is what is going to happen most of the time.
So should we change actually not the curriculum, but the mentality?
I think
that's the big issue, because I'm saying, like, at the moment what I'm doing is about interviewing students at the moment. And I was speaking to one student there's one of these roles, and she's basically a year 2 medical student. And she was like, I'm only year 2, I've got no experience. I was like, just stop right there. Like, just because you're a year 2 doesn't mean you have anything, you have a lot to bring to the table. Just because you're first year, second year. I think medical students don't have enough confidence at the moment, and they don't feel they can go into the placement, and they feel a bit nervous talking to the doctor and stuff. And I think that comes down to sort of communication, and confidence as well, right? But I was listening to a podcast one time somewhere, and I think a doctor was saying that we should send all medical students to Chipotle to work for a year before they go on placement, just to teach them how to talk to customers. That's communication is such an important skill, but that's the sort of mentality I think we need to be providing to medical students. And I think that sort of idea of mentality to ensure that they feel confident speaking up and addressing these issues, I think is just so important.
I think it's like almost a culture of medical school as well. Like I speak to a lot of first years, well, I'm relatively like in the middle, but speaking to first years and second years, they are convinced that they don't bring anything to the table. Whereas
Exactly.
speaking to final years and fourth years, they also are convinced they don't bring anything to the table. But the first years think that the fourth years bring something to the table just because of how far they've progressed through the course. And I think it almost comes from a place of when we were at school, most of us were towards the top end of our classes. And then you get to medical school and now it's like you could have been the finest student at your secondary school. Now you're 10th decile every exam. And I think that kind of demotivates people to speak out about things because people forget that there's almost real life and they get sucked into the culture of medical school and then don't want to speak out about social issues when that has nothing to do with what your academic performance is.
I would 100% agree. And I would actually say that my university is quite good with that in terms of we do conversations with the faculty about the way that it's going. So we have like coffee afternoons and mornings. And they also introduced reverse mentoring, where foundation year students talk to the lecturers about their experiences so that the lecturers understand more about those students' experiences. And with regards to oversaturation of the curriculum, which is what Vasily was talking about, I would, to a certain extent, maybe disagree in terms of medical schools are very independent in terms of the way that they organize their curriculum. And a lot of it is run by clinicians who come in and speak, which is great. Obviously, they have a lot of practical experience. What they do sometimes do is talk about their own interests. And so in my experience, for example, we had a lecture on anemia, which was a great lecture. There was a whole slide on a condition that affects 1 in 1,800 people of Northwestern European descent. But there was no talk of anorexia, and anemia is a very big indicator of anorexia. And that was an opportunity for a topic to be integrated into a lecture that doesn't need to be a whole separate module that is added in. So I think there is scope within the existing curriculum to add things and embed them within lectures that are already there, which would not mean it's more time intensive for students.
Should medical students be designing the curriculum, do you reckon?
I think it's important for perhaps them to be involved, but not obviously designing.
When you think about the curriculum being created, all medical schools will receive the guidance from the GMC. The latest one will be from 2018, and they will receive the points even updated on a yearly basis. Then they will sit around the table and decide how to develop those competencies, which are competencies the GMC wants us to achieve by the time we graduate and we finish our medical program, whether it's a postgraduate or it's an undergraduate program. And that's how they shape that program, the way they deliver the curriculum to us. So I absolutely agree with what Emma said. And to me, one of the clearest examples I've ever made is why have I spent 5 weeks studying schizophrenia and 1 hour in 5 years talking about eating disorders? Was I much more likely to come across an eating disorder during any of my placements rather than a schizophrenic patient? Of course, they're both important in regardless of the conditions that we study, but how do we bring those people, us as students, round the table with those people who are making the decision of how the curriculum will be delivered? That's the key question.
I think it's quite easy to get students around the table. Like, for example, I'm round the table at my university, but I think the big issue is how seriously are those students taken by the other people at the table. So I'd like to bring this idea of like knowledge and who owns the knowledge and who owns the experience. So I think at a university level, I think faculty do genuinely believe that they are the owners of the knowledge and they have the most experience because they have been doing this for years. And you know what, that makes sense. However, I think in some situations, there can be multiple knowledge holders. And for example, Emma and Vasily, you've talked about like eating disorders and putting eating disorders into in making it a bigger part of the curriculum. I personally believe the people who have the best overall idea of any curriculum are the people who are going through it themselves. And universities and medical schools could do a lot better at actually listening to the people who are actually going through it themselves.
I'm going to come at it with my MedSoc perspective that co-creation of the curriculum is obviously key. I do think the responsibility ultimately lies with the medical school and with the staff, and that trickles down from the GMC. But students need the chance to feed in and contribute to the curriculum. It's difficult because we get so many feedback requests and we get so many things coming at us that you often get overwhelmed by them, and then actually you're not putting your effort in your proper intention. If you get to the end of a module, we as students need to take advantage of that feedback option. You know, I hate filling in the Google form as much as anyone, but it's the only way that that's going to improve for the next years and going forward. And getting around that table as well, the difficulty is that often that falls on too few people. So as with a MedSoc, you know, we are very much involved with meeting. We meet with the faculty frequently and we get to review modules and we get to look at them. But that's a very small number of students, and I just simply don't have time in my day. If I was doing a full-time job, like some of the London unis are lucky to have, I could go and I could potentially look at it, but I just don't. But there's a whole academic representation structure that I think is typically underused in universities generally, actually. The course rep structure that most of them operate, actually you get a lot of course reps that their engagement drops off because they don't feel important, they don't feel valued. And actually, that's a really strong resource. You know, if I look across Bristol, there are hundreds of course reps across the different courses. And within medicine, we've got 6 per year. You know, that's a bunch of students who can bring their experiences and their thoughts to it. And actually, if each module was sat down and reviewed and those students were given a bit more empowerment, a bit more encouragement, saying, what you say here will actually change how this works in the future, I think actually you could start to do that co-creation a lot better. And that's absolutely an underutilized resource that could be done a lot better by medical schools and even universities more generally.
I was going to say, talking about underutilized resources, I'd say that actually student organizations are really important as well. And we've got a lot of power to make change because it's like a large number of individuals compared to like one person's like trying to sit down with their medical school. And for example, Students of Global Health, we really tried to like empower students to make change individually, like at our branches. And obviously Incision did obviously the GEM study, you might have heard of it. It's the Global Health Education in Medical School study. And it was a really interesting study. And I thought that the collaborator model that was used in that was a really, really effective method that could be applied to so many other areas in terms of initiating curricular change with students. So they basically got collaborators at, I think, every med school around the country as far as possible, and sort of got them to collect data for their medical schools. Then this data was like sent back and analysed, you know, how many of the required global health learning outcomes are being met. And then those students went back and advocated with their medical schools. So you collect the data and then you have that knowledge, you have the knowledge and you have the comparison to the rest of the country that you can go back and you have grounds on which to lobby your medical school to change their curriculum. So I think that's a really effective model, and I think something that as Students of Global Health we try to do is when we run a campaign, when we try to change something within the curriculum, we adopt this educate, advocate, act model. So first of all, like what you were talking about with possession of knowledge, that's what we try to equalize in the educate stage. So like get people to understand why this is an issue, why it needs to be on the curriculum. So for example, we're doing a similar thing now with climate change and health and trying to get that on the curriculum, because obviously I don't know how much you guys learn about climate change and health, but from what I can remember, I've probably had like 1 or 2 passing mentions in a lecture, and this is something that's going to be such a huge issue in the future of healthcare. And I think there was a study done by the IFMSA which showed that across, I think, 2,000 global medical schools, only 15% of those even mentioned climate change in their entire curricula. So that's something that's really important. And then the sort of advocate and act stages, well, student organisations are key in sort of giving students the backing and the skills to go back and make those changes and act alongside their medical schools. And I think that when you've got statistics, when you've got evidence and you've got national comparisons, I think that medical school faculty do tend to sort of react more. So Emma, you can probably speak to this, but from the UAM report card system as well, that's something that really changes like the transparency of research and development across the country, simply because you give them like a report card saying, you know, you're not doing very well, and the medical school has an incentive to change.
It's not necessarily always, well, it is an incentive to change, but I think it's very bad on their behalf, because it's almost like, it feels like it's always done for image, because now they know that the students are aware that they're doing bad in this field, so they almost do a performative stunt so that they're not in that field anymore.
Absolutely. It's like when you look at any of the changes that we're trying to implement, and sometimes, like, I'm so glad to see that Jack mentioned about student representation. I've been a student representative for all my 6 years at university now. It's something that really, I hope I've helped to thrive and enhance across my time at Holyoke. But when do we introduce, or we try to push for change? Are we simply introducing another tick box exercise, many of which we go through med school, or we're truly pushing for change? How do we make those people who are going to implement our curriculum actually passionate about driving that change for us after we raise the issue?
I think something that you guys might experience that we do is having to reflect on everything. So reflection for us has become a huge part of our curriculum. And so, I mean, you put in a cannula one time, you need to reflect on it. But genuinely, as a result, now in year 4, I feel quite comfortable reflecting. And if someone says, go and write a short reflection, I actually could do it. And I think now I'm getting more out of it because I know what it's supposed to be about. And it's become less of a tick box exercise. And I think as a result, as you were saying, Jack, the original responsibility should lie with the medical school to sort of enforce these lectures or sessions on cultural competence, and whether that be because they're sign-in, however it is, if they're started as something that is essential for all students to do. And then you get patients coming in and telling their stories. You know, if you have a patient with autism come in and explain, look, this is what happened to me, this is what went really well in healthcare, this is actually where I came away feeling really upset or let down. You know, I'd love for the future generation of doctors to be better at this. You as a student really feel fired up, you feel inspired, you feel that empathy. And I think then the responsibility over time shifts to you as the student to make the effort to become a better doctor and to actually figure out for yourself, how can I provide best care for these patients? But I think it probably starts with the medical school themselves, giving you the opportunity or putting those patients in front of you. So you feel that kind of desire to help.
I think also what we need to do is, like, when we actually go about implementing this thing, this policy, we're trying to, change the curriculum, for example, we need to frame it in the right way for these medical schools, because, and I think the way to do that is to look at the sort of issues with NHS, which sounds a bit crazy, but, if we're preparing the workforce, what do we need to prepare the workforce for? So one of the issues, of course, is culture. There's a problem with retention with the NHS, and it's been highlighted during COVID-19. We need to ensure that that medical students coming into becoming a doctor will want to stay. They want to have this sort of great environment where there's sort of psychological safety, where they feel comfortable. And another issue is like, the workforce demand and stuff. So there's a lot of demand on the workforce, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of aging population, etc. And I think framing that sort of concept and just letting medical schools understand that, these are the issues of the NHS. And for us to really prepare medical students and the workforce, these are things we need to be doing. Putting things about getting experience, putting things about, say, digital health, or putting things about global health. These are the sort of things we need to be doing, I think, now, to hopefully prepare the workforce to, when they become a doctor, to ensure that some of the issues which are currently, problems arising in the NHS can sort of be addressed.
Part of the reason, I admit, I think, you have talked to a lot more people in medical education than I have and know more of the kind of resistance to change, but some of it will be that medical approach of everything needs to be evidence-based and there's patient safety at risk. And if we completely change up our curriculum and it fails, what do you do when you have a bunch of doctors who are unable to operate? So, I sort of understand where their thinking's coming from, but I think that's one of the reasons, actually, and it's kind of dreadful saying it, but reputational threat is really powerful for kicking universities into action, and they're slow moving for all these reasons. And as I say, I have some sympathy for them doing it that way. But if there's something that comes up, and a report card is the perfect thing that scares them. There's a brilliant planetary health report card that's just come over, started in the States, and it's now being done in the UK. So I hope all your medical schools are involved in that. And if you give them a grade and they're comparing their grade to the rest of the country, the reputational starts flashing. And I've sat on the trustee board. Reputation was mentioned almost as much as any other word on the trustee board. Universities are freaking out about it constantly. So it's got to be used carefully. You can alienate people very quickly by taking that sort of approach. But if it's something that you really believe needs to happen, it's a good way to kick them into action. It needs to be balanced with performative action, but it can be a very strong tool.
We've seen it with, for example, with the BMA Racial Harassment Charter, which was just produced this year, where in a very subtle, perhaps non-intentional way, actually brought forward for all the medical schools how inadequate they were meeting the requirements, both in the teaching, but also in the support and of students who had faced racial harassment throughout their careers. And in addition to this, what sanctions they were putting in place for those who had actually perpetrated any of this. And actually, nearly all medical schools across the UK have already signed or agreed to take up the Racial Harassment Charter, which is a huge achievement in such a short amount of time. Of course, it has been supported by all the movements across the globe for racial equality, but nonetheless, yes, you're absolutely right. I think it plays a huge role into the way you can drive the conversation forward in order to achieve your aims. I would just want to go back to Malone. I know you wanted to make a point and perhaps change the conversation altogether, so please go for it.
If I was just to almost to summarize, you can see that I was learning my communication skills. To summarize what everyone has been saying, I think fundamentally the key almost to going forwards in the future, for me, in my eyes, is integration. I feel like without integration, we'll spend years having these conversations, going back and forth with these conversations and not making any action in the field. I think if we can slowly start to integrate things, it will start to open the doors for a lot of other things, because people will be able to see that it can be done. I think in my own instance, before I even, when I had the idea of Mind the Gap, I spoke to a lot of people at loads of different universities, and they simply told me that you can't integrate something into a curriculum. But from Mind the Gap, people are now seeing that actually it can be done. From COVID, people are also seeing that actually students can do an OSCE online. Students can watch surgery online. So I think slowly with those integrations coming into the medical curriculum, it opens the door for, other things such as global health, digital health, eating disorders, the whole lot. I think all of those things will just have a door open to it, because you'll go to your medical school and you'll be like, well, if you can do that, how come you can't do this? Because it's literally the same principle.
Amazing. I also want to add something else, which I think we all touched upon it, but I want to say it out loud. I think it's empowerment. It doesn't matter if you're 12, it doesn't matter if you're 15, 16, 18, 20, 40, whatever stage of your career you're at. Your voice matters, and it's something that I've certainly come to understand for myself. I struggled with raising the issues that we were facing with teaching, but also the support that we had at university. I never felt valued. Like you all said, you're just another tick box exercise because they need a student representative at the table. They hear your voice, but it comes in from one ear and goes out the other. So actually feeling empowered, you matter, your voice matters, your perception matters, or whatever the experience is, that's extremely important. So that's certainly one of my takeaway messages from today.
And I think even to everyone, I literally bang on about this all the time. I think as a medical student, I think we get so, I said this earlier, but I'm saying it again, we get so bogged down in what medical school actually is, so bogged down in all the content, so bogged down in the entire culture, that we forget that we actually bring a lot of value to the table and a lot of value to wider society. I'm sure all of us here, when we went home after the first term of medical school, we got home and all of a sudden we were the doctor in the house. If any of your family member had the most minor illness, they were looking at you to provide an answer. So I think that just shows you that in somebody else's eyes, you are an expert, even though you were looking at yourself like, I'm one term into medical school, but your family views you as an expert. And I think you should always use that to know that you're an expert in a particular field, in a particular room. It doesn't necessarily matter what your status is. If you are well knowledge on digital health, when you walk into the room, you're the expert. If you're well knowledge on eating disorders, when you walk into the room, you're the expert. And I think it's almost, medical schools also need to acknowledge that as well, that sometimes the student is actually the expert and they are sometimes the best person to speak out about this, and to almost educate the rest of the team to say, actually, this is how things should be done. Because 9 times out of 10, I don't want to like shame any medical schools, but they probably are the expert in that case.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think that there's a lot of competition in this world in terms of medical students competing against each other, and then medical schools competing against each other as well. And that's not an empowering concept. And we need collaboration in order to achieve progress. And I think that supporting each other in terms of building up resilience, building up mental health, and just supporting each other in general is the way to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just remember my point from earlier. I was gonna ask, like, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but what do like people think about medical and anthropology?
I've been thinking about doing it for my intercalation, and I think it sounds really interesting.
No, but like, do you think it should be like, it shouldn't be like an external module, like you're intercalating to go and do it elsewhere, but essentially doctors should be, and I can't even say it, but
anthropologists
to a particular extent?
I think it should. It just should. We talk a lot about epidemiology. We talk about not so much about global health, but I think it certainly would apply a lot to global health as well. And it's often overlooked. Perhaps it's just seen as a branch that you can go into if you want to later on, but it's not really relevant for you now.
And just to define what a medical anthropologist is, if I Google it, medical anthropology is a subfield of anthropology that draws upon the social, cultural, biological, and linguistic anthropology to better understand those factors which influence health and well-being, the experience and distribution of illness, the prevention, treatment, and of sickness, and the healing processes.
What does that mean exactly, Alex?
Essentially, being culturally competent.
Yeah.
Almost like looking at people from a very holistic manner. And yeah, that's probably the simplest way to put it.
I'll give you an example. So I'm Italian. I'm fully Italian. Certainly, my way of dealing with illness, dealing with medicine has changed ever since I come to the UK. When I go back, I see a completely different interaction with the way they deal. I cannot walk up to my parents or have a doctor say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're in pain." It will not be understandable. It is not a way they'll be able to cope with it. And trying to explore our idea, concerns, expectation, feelings around their illness, it's something unthinkable. I've tried to do that sometimes with friends if they were having any difficulties. But it's a concept which in the language, in my culture, and perhaps in Sicily more than in the north, I'm from Sicily, is simply unachievable. From my perspective, in 6 years, I've gone back and I tried to speak to family and friends. I've never been able to achieve the same type of consultations I've been taught to deliver here in the UK. And that's where I think medical anthropology plays a huge part into it. And I've got friends from across the globe. And actually, when I take into account the small differences, even regional, if you were to go from Scotland, perhaps down south, and I've got friends from across those areas, you can tell how culture truly influences it, the way they present it.
How even people take on, like what you said, how people take on healthcare. I think one thing that shocked me at first at medical school is like, oh my God, how does a patient not want this treatment? Like the NHS is free. How can they not want this? But when you actually have an understanding of like where people are coming from, what people know and what people have experienced, I think it kind of allows you to put yourself in their shoes. And it even allows you to become a little bit like more empathetic. It's like, if we're talking 2020 and even the future, one thing I know about my community, which I think will be a very big problem that I would say the world hasn't yet seen, is the arrival of this COVID vaccine. We saw in the pandemic, or in the midst of the pandemic, that patients from a BME background and Black patients specifically were dying more. And I think with the introduction of this vaccine, the medical world almost thinks that, oh, they were dying more, so they will take the vaccine more. When the case is, from a lot of people that I know, they will not take the vaccine at all, simply because of what's happened in the past. Everyone has heard a story of someone who has now become almost a guinea pig to medicine. We hear all these stories of like experiments like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, the case of Marion Sims. There's just so many examples that people will be like, no, I'm not taking it. But from a medical perspective and being at medical school, if I was to almost be so isolated to what's going on in the world, I'd be like, how can you not take that?
Thank you very much for that point, Malone. I want to wrap it up, but before we close, I would like to go around the table. First of all, thank you ever so much. But I want to ask you, what is your main aim, or what would be your series of aims you would like to achieve, or perhaps see achieved globally or nationally, or perhaps simply locally in your medical school, in your local community, in order to enhance our medical curriculum?
I would say it would be a change in the mindset of the people who actually genuinely hold the power. As much as I'm like activist, yeah, I hold the power, but realistically, the people who own the power are the course directors and the deans of the medical schools. I would like to see a change in their mentality and understand that that within any system there can be multiple knowledge holders. And in terms of like dealing with feedback, this is probably the same across the country. There's always like a low response rate for feedback forms. And I would like people to start seeing even one negative comment is enough to start a conversation about something. And things don't need to be overhauled completely for it to be recognized as change. It can be something very, very, very little. It doesn't need to be like this big change and like we've ripped the curriculum to shreds and we're building it again from scratch. It doesn't need to be that.
Yeah.
It needs to be a small, tiny change. It can be a small, tiny change, I should say.
Jump off that because I think the integration theme is highlighted, and it's vital, of course. My personal change that I would like to see to improve the amount of integration of all these issues we've talked about is empowering those groups that I mentioned earlier on. So empowering student reps and actually taking them on rather than as a tokenistic gesture, properly aim to improve your curriculum. I think, you know, that's a national thing that could improve, possibly even global. As a sort of my position in a MedSoc, I'd like to see better allied and aligned MedSocs working together. I think actually we often do get the responsibility of a lot of academic representation falls on us, and probably don't always get loads of the credit that goes along with that. And it's difficult, it's stressful. Managing that alongside your studies is really hard. I think actually if we brought the working together, it's so much easier to share best practice and to have representation. And I think, you know, Vasily, you know well what the BMA MSc do and things like that. And I would love to see a sort of paralleled model in quite a similar method with MedSocs they're representing, and almost that on the ground that's happening, so that we can share the best practice and the ways that things are integrated. Because loads of these issues, as we've said, it's simple small step integration starting from early on and carrying the whole way through in a truly helical fashion that could actually make some sort of a difference. If we can share that together, it makes it much easier in power to put these changes in place.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack.
I 100% agree with Jack. So I think enhancing collaboration between different student organisations and between medical schools is key. Also, enhancing the curriculum in terms of building up medical student adaptability and resilience to help them when they encounter new situations that they haven't before, and to help them within the very highly stressful environment that is a medical career. And like previously said, integration of important subjects in the curriculum in order to keep up with the fast-paced growth of the medical sector.
Thank you, Emma.
I agree with Emma's point in particular about adaptability. I think for me, something that's really important is all medical students leaving feeling like they can adapt to situations and be flexible, because guidelines are invaluable. Of course, they're really important, but I think for real life, you also need to be able to adapt quickly and edit and be flexible in how you treat your patients in order to adapt your style to their needs. So I think for me, that confidence to be adaptable is a big change that I would love to see.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that everyone's already said. And something else that I'd just like to see is like conversations being had. So I think it's all well and good that like so many of us have these ideas and these things that we want to see changed, but for medical schools to see students as valuable and to see their position and opinions as important to changing the curriculum, to have a curriculum that represents the students.
Of course, I want to see more digital health, obviously, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say I think what's more important than that is, as I think you guys have already said, is just empowerment and confidence. And I think the way we sort of achieve that is by encouraging and providing more opportunities for people, say, in the third, fourth, fifth year, to when they've had a bit more experience and understand what could be changed, to then be able to have a meeting with, say, the dean or someone who's higher up to have that influence. Because I think that sort of collaboration needs to happen. And it's speaking to the people at the top, I think, is really important because they're the ones who have the sort of power. But that sort of collaboration is so important. And if the first and second years, to just the first year, see that from the start and realize that that opportunity is available, then they'll feel empowered as well from the beginning. And they'll be sort of taking notes from the beginning to see what things they think could be changed.
Amazing, thank you.
I definitely do think that change can be done, and I think people need to almost accept that change can be done. I think a lot of the time people are resistant to change because change always requires somebody to do the work, and nobody wants to put themselves forward to do the work. I think as well as having conversations, I think it's very important to have action. I think one thing that I have seen is that loads of these governing bodies and almost like these people at the top, they love to have conversations, but when it's time to do the work, nobody shows up. So I think as well as having conversations, it's very important that we start having action and not to always complicate this action. I think people expect change to come overnight. Sometimes change can literally be a 10-year plan, but as long as we're moving in the right direction, we're moving in the right direction. And I think too often, I believe that people perceive these changes that we're trying to make as in, oh, we want it in our curriculum tomorrow. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be there tomorrow, but we want to see that the doctors of tomorrow will have the curricula, will have that type of stuff in the curricula.
Absolutely beautifully said. Thank you very much. And just in a way to summarize it, I think we've been able to have such an amazing conversation tonight. We've spoken about some of the topics that perhaps we want to see changed, of course, but also how that change should be happening. We've spoken about representation and the right structure and how to gain a seat at that table and feeling your voice being heard and being empowered to drive that change forward. And like Malone just said, now actually putting those plans into action in order to achieve that, perhaps not tomorrow, but whenever it's going to be down the line. And regardless of the changes we've seen, we've still got a very long way to go because we've got a very dynamic curriculum that we all experiment and we all experience across these years. So thank you very much. I'm sure that the audience will have enjoyed our discussion as much as I have. I want to thank all of you for being such incredible panelists, so inspiring, so motivational, and so outspoken. And it's great to see such great voices already amongst my colleagues across the country. So thank you very much for joining in today, and I hope we get to see you at future HLA Live events, and keep watching this channel for more. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, thank you. Take care.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marlwaner, the Director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.